It's December 27th, 2018. This is Lisa Chu. This is getting fun. um, it's also a way to metabolize my experiences each day. So this is episode 2 of Everyday Truth. It's a practice that I'm sharing that won't necessarily be daily. I hope it will be. But for now, it's just whenever I feel that it is of benefit to my wholeness, my health, or my growth to turn on the camera and speak truth from my heart. I'm going to do it. So lots to talk about today, actually. The first thing I wanted to do, because I noticed that my new sketchbooks, I've, as of about the beginning of October, I've expanded my sketchbooks to include not only my drawing and art, but ideas and inspiration and words and everything that I want to honor with space in my life. And these are some drawings from a book called The Teachings by Brenda Amina Robinson, and an artist from Columbus, Ohio, who made amazing. These are just such small examples of her drawings that have the writings of spirituals, Black spirituals that sustained the slaves during their time of bondage and sang their way into hope and sang their stories to their descendants. And she did a lot of amazing three-dimensional mixed media art about her African roots and the stories of her people and her own life in Columbus, Ohio, and her neighborhood and the characters in it. And really inspiring artist using autobiographical material, which is, of course, where I'm focused myself now. But it occurs to me that the absence of stories is so huge of a gaping hole in my experience as the person I am, having been born in America to parents who came to this country in their early adulthood from war-ravaged countries, although they never mentioned that. But there was a ton of devastation in their childhoods and in my grandparents' childhoods. So it went back very far, but nobody ever talked about it for whatever reason. And I think everyone had their own reasons that they might not have even known why they chose to just put it all behind them and believe in America. But that's what happened. And so the stories of real human stories of ancestors are pretty much lost in terms of what that was all about. You know, what did they fight for? And why did they make the sacrifices that they did? Not just in conceptual terms, like, you know, quoting Confucius, but real human stories are really lacking. So last night, what I was dealing with was having posted something on Facebook, which I sort of play with as a way to test out, you know, ways of saying things that are on my mind and words in this flat two-dimensional social media space, which is fraught with all of these problems. But I posted something about Confucius, and it was from a place of awakened anger that I was realizing that, you know, many of my childhood experiences with Confucius were from like mocking television characters saying like Confucius say, or on fortune cookies having things quoted from Confucius. And so he was portrayed as a sage and a wise person, and that's all I knew. And I never read any of his texts, and my parents never quoted him. They would just say, there's an old Chinese saying, but they wouldn't say who. So Confucian philosophy was just a total abstract void for me. I'd kind of heard about the idea of filial piety, which my parents tried to fulfilling their obligations under Confucian rules toward their parents. So it was kind of this unspoken thing that I observed in my house without having any kind of understanding of what was going on. And I think that's something that I'm really trying to put together for myself and understand. So I was dealing with having posted this angry post, which was kind of a sarcastic praise of Confucianism that some people got, and I don't know what people got out of it, but there was a lot of discussion that was generated in the comments. And so then I had to deal with my feelings of being exposed and noticing that context is really important, because I have some private groups that I'm in that are just for Asian women with difficult mothers, as an example. And there's a lot more disclosure there, because so many of us, daughters who are holding on to the shame of our parents for them, and grandparents and ancestors for them, are still bound by this idea that we can't say anything in public about these things that we feel shame about because it reflects on us. And the clarity that I'm getting to is that the fact that we hold on to that shame and let it constrain our actions in the present is the indication that we haven't healed from it. We haven't crossed the threshold of really freeing ourselves from that. We still hold on to it on behalf of those who it belongs to and who it really is about. So I had to really sit with what I was feeling, and I printed out what I wrote and I read it, and I didn't have any regrets about it. But I was just hearing, I was trying to discern what the voices of criticism that I was hearing in my head were. And one of them was, she's really on fire. Which in certain contexts could be like, yeah, she's on fire. She's kicking ass. She's doing great. But in this case, it was like, it was a judgment and non-approval of the emotion of anger, even though this wasn't directed at people. It was directed at this philosophy and the underpinnings of a culture. So again, Jeff Foster right now is a really has written some really comforting poetry posts that really have helped me find words that help. And so ironically, I stumbled upon his post last night called Anger, the Extraordinary Fire Inside. And so I'm going to read that right now. Anger is not dark. Anger is not dangerous. Anger is not unspiritual. Anger is not bad. Anger is not a sign of our lack of evolution, or our failure, or our lack of insight, peace, enlightenment, maturity, health, anything. Anger is simply fire. Fire can burn. Fire can cleanse. Fire can illuminate. Fire can heal. Anger is a real and valid emotion, billions of years old, intelligently rising in the body to protect us from a real or imaginary threat. Wanting to set boundaries, ready to say no, willing to stand up for our values, yearning to be heard. Anger is not the problem. Anger is not inherently violent. It is in our reaction to our anger. That is where the violence begins. When we repress and reject our anger power, when we stuff it down, refuse to feel it or even acknowledge it, hide it in order to be nice and please and impress and protect others, when we attack and hurt others in order to find relief from our anger, when we judge and shame and rage and manipulate and try to control others, what they think, what they feel, what they desire or do not, or try to make them feel bad, punish them, that is where the darkness lies, in the reaction to our anger, in our search for discharge, in our running, in our disembodiment, not in the anger itself. Anger is only energy, fierce and powerful energy arising in the body, not a sin or an unspiritual force to be eradicated, but a creative and fiery expression of life itself. Anger is simply a raw part of us asking to be met with understanding, with compassion, with love, with slowness, with breath. Some of the most violent people I've ever met have been on the surface the most, quote, spiritual ones, the enlightened ones, the gurus, the perfect ones, the ones who never get angry, the ones who are always peaceful and calm and in a state of perfect love and equanimity, the ones who dwell in pure awareness. Yeah, right. For there's no true love without love for our anger when it comes to visit. True light is willing and able to enlighten the shadow and bless the mess. Anger is not inherently dark. Anger is not dangerous. Anger is not unspiritual. Anger is not bad or shameful or sinful. All these outdated beliefs stem from a profound fear and misunderstanding and distrust of the body. We can undo the conditioning. Next time anger surges, as it will, can you slow down, connect, breathe, feel, breathe again, and get curious about the fire inside? Underneath your anger, you may just discover a tender, fragile, frightened heart, a beautiful vulnerability, and a self-protective power billions of years in the making. Thank you, Jeff Foster. So I got to sit with that, and at the same time, I'm also reading this book, which is a collection of short stories published just this year in English by living Taiwanese women writers. And I'm just, the experience of reading this as me, someone who has this insider-outsider view of Taiwanese experience through my dad, who was native Taiwanese, and my mom, who grew up in Taiwan but has repressed all of her memories of it, so I carry that like a deep knowing at some level and also a not knowing. And it's very, very hard to explain that in the American context, because the voices of, quote, Asian American writers in America are writing for an American, meaning white, audience. So there's always kind of this explanation process going on, I find. And because you learn creative writing in America from MFA programs that are white, generally. And so there's a way to win prizes in writing in America. And what I found in these stories, these Taiwanese women, is they just dive right in. They don't have to explain, like, where is Taiwan? You know, it's not Thailand. It's not Thai food. You know, like they know what they're talking about. They're talking to their own community, like their readers in Chinese. So even though this is translated, but the originals were in Chinese. So it's like, it's amazing their ability to just cut right to the chase and talk about their resentments about their parents, their pressure to be married as women, their pressure to have children, their ambivalence about consumerism, materialism, and industrial development on the island of Taiwan, the loss of their past, and all of these themes that I'm experiencing through my own inquiry, but they have that they're depicting through that lens of being in Taiwan. And then, you know, one of them is about 50 years old and is talking about how her grandfather came to the island also in 1949 and no one left, and that she has this strong desire to go back to the mainland to explore her grandfather's world and be the one who returns as the granddaughter. And that was just amazing to hear that parallel, that, you know, she was only displaced, you know, that one time 2 generations ago and had that stability of 2 generations. And I have this double displacement, and I feel that same sort of need to go back and retrieve and travel and wander and connect with all of these mysteries. And I sat with that, and realize that underneath the anger for me, it's my search. I need to kind of like feel through the anger to get to the grief that's underneath. That was never expressed because it was just not allowed. No one, there was no slowing down. It was all one big traumatic response of it, our whole lives of living in America. And so these few words, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's more from Jeff Foster, but this image of the turbulence of healing. He says, healing from trauma, which I am defining here as chronically suppressed emotion, can sometimes feel like going through severe turbulence on a night flight. And he talks about how there's just this up and down. And I love that definition of trauma as chronically suppressed emotion. That it's not about, sometimes we talk about like what was the event of the trauma. But now I think more of trauma investigation and inquiry is like, what are the effects in human bodies and in the human psyche from trauma, whatever it is. And it's really any event that resulted in chronically suppressed emotions. So I touched the fear for me in expressing anger, and it was that people will think I'm crazy and I'll lose my credibility, which is funny because it's like my credibility, meaning that professional credibility of being the generic whatever, like someone who adheres to standards of professionalism. And all of that is completely conditioned from a young age. My violin teacher in her perfect makeup and suits and high heels and all the time, perfectly white, clean carpeting, that idea of perfection that we could never attain, but we also aspired to because that was the American ideal. So we punished ourselves relentlessly in pursuit of that. And at some points in our lives, we may have even achieved it at great cost. So as I was wandering around today, taking my walk and breathing in some outside air and looking at the harbor seals that were laying on the beach in Moss Beach here, I felt into this image of this navigation that I'm going through in this process right now of speaking truth. Like I'm talking about what's actually going on for me right now on a daily basis. And I'm putting it into the public realm to be consumed after I put it into the space through my voice. And that navigation is like, the image was of Scylla and Charybdis. And in 8th grade, we read some abridged version of the Odyssey by Homer about Ulysses' journey and all of the things that he encounters on his journey of being blown off course on his way home. And I remember this to this day, the image of Scylla and Charybdis and how he had to navigate his boat through a very, very narrow window of survivability, where on one side there was this giant whirlpool that if he veered at all onto the edge of it, he would just get completely sucked down into it and lose everything. And on the other side was a rock. So if he navigated too far to the other side, he would get blown into that rock and the boat would be destroyed. And so it was this choice. And some say that that's the origin of our phrase, between a rock and a hard place. But I actually thought about it because I felt really acutely that what I'm navigating right now in this revelation of my own truth is from navigating from this need to cling to other humans for sense of belonging. And this is very different from having a sense of belonging with other humans based on a connection of experiences. Clinging to other humans means you need something from them in order to fill you up and give you the sense of belonging, which is like the from territory. And then through this narrow navigation, it's like on one side, the whirlpool, if you will, is the risk of being misunderstood. Going back to Audre Lorde from yesterday, being misunderstood for the truth of my experience. that's very real, that I could get sucked into the vortex of being misunderstood. And I experienced that last night with my post and just sat with it and felt into it. But that's a scary place if we don't have those skills to sit. And then on the other side, the rock is being liked for false appearances, or just constantly performing and getting the applause, but knowing that there's something underneath you're still hiding and holding on to in shame. And that's another kind of death and destruction. You can die with a lot of people liking you in terms of the Facebook likes and also the approval. And on the other side of this navigation, what I imagine to be this open sea is being full of clarity from self-understanding. And I like the word self-understanding because love, as I said yesterday, is a very messy word that has mixture of truth and false things in it for me. So self-love is less potent and clear for me than self-understanding at this point anyway. So this was my sketchbook page today. Just putting that into an image for myself. And it really arose from this feeling of, okay, on my hike, I was saying to myself, yes, I'm going to go home and do this video and say what I need to say because it's part of my navigation. That I can definitely not do it or just shy away from it, but I sort of drift back toward the rock, or I drift backwards into that needing other humans to give me something to belong. And so I do this to keep on course and navigating. And it is work in terms of like being so aware of now, what's happening now in my body. And that's where I get these truths from. I am developing this sense of being able to dive in and feel for what's really true, what's really true, what's really true, and what's all the voices shouting their bad advice. Going back to the Mary Oliver poem, the voices that shout, which are not what's really true. It's happening. It's part of the experience. So it's important to acknowledge that. But underneath, what's my heart's truth? What's my heart's truth? What is my body experiencing and why? So this is fun. And I hope that something in today gave you something to think about or add to your own journey, which it is. And I love that the Scylla and Charybdis come from Ulysses' journey, the very first hero's journey, told as a story, and that was such a navigation through all of these waters and so much territory, that in the process of navigating, the navigator becomes something different. And that's what I'm really attuned to now, is that it's so easy to get attached to, do I make posts or do I make pretty pictures or do I write things or do I do videos or do I do performances? And I can strip away all of that now and I come down to the real important thing for me in whatever I make, whether it is a painting, a drawing, a sketchbook, a journal, a written post, a tweet, a video, a newsletter, a book, a performance, a workshop, or anything. What is happening for me? What am I, the navigator, becoming as I navigate the territory of making it? That makes it so fun, and that makes it also very juicy and rich with challenges. Remember that there wasn't just Scylla and Charybdis. There was many, many challenges along that Ulysses journey. But keeping my focus on what's happening to me as I make these things is really, to me, about focusing on the process.